Thanks to corporate downsizing, this program will be replaced next week by Home Shopping Network, but I'm sure you're going to enjoy it. I'm Jon Caldara, president of the Independence Institute and your devil's advocate. The media keeps shrinking, at least the local media. To talk to me about it from the Colorado Broadcasters Association, Justin Sasso. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, John. Thanks for having me.
Nice tie, you suit.
Yeah,
and of course, from Complete Colorado, you know him, you love him, you don't believe a thing he writes. Todd Shepherd.
John, thanks for having me on. Thanks for that warm and glowing introduction.
All right, let's all bow our heads because you've been in the radio business. Yes. You've been in the radio business. I'm still in the radio business, but we're seeing more and more of the corporate side of radio, and we're losing a lot of live and local. My program on 850 KOA, a victim of corporate downsizing as well. I'll still be on KHOW. Yeah, exactly. Now I'm on KHOW now, Sunday nights, 5 p.m. Turn me on during dinner. Please, I'm a lonely man. I've been abandoned. But we're seeing more and more of this. Rick Barber, for 30 years, late night host supreme on KOA, got his walking papers, and it's just business. Tell me a little bit, since as a broadcaster you're seeing this not just in radio but television as well. Is it common?
There's a downsizing occurring. I think part of it's got to be budget. You know, everybody's dealing with smaller budgets, and think about it. Where does commercial broadcasting get its funds? It's from the retailer, and where are the retailers? They've been in the tank for 3-4 years now, and when you have an economy that continues to slide like that, those funds dry up for advertising dollars because they're not advertising as much, and your radio and television stations have to start either seeking those dollars elsewhere, or they end up having to cut back, unfortunately. So.
That sounds like so impersonal.
That was my CBA hat.
That was nice.
We can get into the radio side.
Get into the radio side. So. This all seemed to really take a hit when the Rocky Mountain News closed. Here in Colorado, for me, that was a watershed moment of the local news. And I thought the Rocky did a superb job, better than the Post, of local coverage, local flavor, local voices. That this was part of the town, and there are very few voices now that are part of the town. I think of Westward, that great alternative weekly, no longer has, for the exact same reason, Kenny B, the great cartoonist. How in the world do you have Westward without Kenny B? It's not Westward now, it's something else.
As for Westward, I can't explain, but I think you're right that at least for the Rocky, their demise, it was a signature moment for the city and the state, and really one of the voices that they couldn't fill the void completely, but the Denver Daily News stepped up big time, and even they've gone out of business now. I still think when it comes to newspapers, and especially the Denver Post, there's still a lot of revenue to be maximized through video. Me personally, I'm an Oklahoman. I mean, I'm a native Oklahoman. I've lived here since 2005.
Oddly, you say that with some sort of pride.
So when I go home, though, and I look at the Daily Oklahoman's website, News OK, I would estimate that about 70 to 80% of all of their stories have some kind of video that accompanies it. Now, how much can you say that for the Denver Post? And for all of those stories, they have a 30-second ad that runs before that, and that's good revenue for if your banner ad on your website is not getting you enough money, or your other advertising.
And the Rocky was on the path to do that. They started doing some incredible video reporting.
Yeah, and the Rocky absolutely was on that. I don't know. Of course, we don't know if they were eventually going to monetize that. You would think that they would have had to have made that decision, though, that they would monetize that. Excuse me, that video work at some point.
Explain in radio and in broadcast, why is it that live and local is so hard to do? Why is it more expensive? Why?
Because
other than our ridiculous wild salaries.
Yeah, we used to, now I take off the CBA hat and put on the former broadcaster owner of an operation, and the biggest expense on your books are people, from your sales staff to your office staff and to your talent. And talent wants to demand a little bit more. Your talent. Yes, that's the line item on the budget. But when you get into that expense and that amount of money for each show, you have to consider it's not just somebody. The biggest problem, and this isn't real. Well, I don't know, but you did your own show, sitting behind a microphone. Isn't just sitting there chatting into a microphone and having a conversation with people. There's prep work beforehand. There's someone sitting across. There's someone. I'm not talking about your show in particular, but we have to invest in a call screener. You've got to have a producer on the other side of the glass.
All right, so one cheap local
local
guy
show, you got three people
who's
sitting,
just
yeah.
talking, and then somebody who's just out of detox answering the phones when people call in. How
Still wants a paycheck.
Just throw 'em some booze. That can't be all that expensive.
You know what? If I can jump in here really quick, I remember in the few years that I worked at KOA, every year I would get this one-page summary that showed me how much I was earning in all of the benefits that I received from Clear Channel. I actually made more in benefits than I made salary. So that's the hidden part of the cost of an employee that people rarely look at. I mean, my health insurance combined with all of the other insurances they offered me, and of course they weren't giving these things to me 100%. I was having to buy in myself, but still they were incurring some expense too. And it's hard to believe, but I remember looking at that statement one time and I said, wow, I make more in benefits than I do in my cash salary.
Which again talks to you about what Clear Channel pays. We'll talk about that some other time.
I'll add to this, and I will not name the company, but when I first entered, I went from programming into sales. And when I first went into my first sales job, I was excited. I came storming through the door. I had my box of goodies to put in my little cube, and it was the first day of the rest of my life, and I was going to be a salesman, an account executive for radio. At that same time, I passed Herb Tarlick, exactly. I had a much better tie. And unfortunately, that very same day as I walked through the door, one of my best buddies who had been on the on-air side, doing middays for years, was walking out with his box. And you look at the bottom line and you go, we need more people out on the streets, working the advertising dollars side of things. And this guy, we can't justify it. We have to,
We remember WKRP. I think we're all kind of the age of that terrible sitcom, but it worked for us. The individually owned station. I mean, you've done that. You've had.
We weren't that far removed from it with Mom at the top.
Right. You got Mom at the top, but you'd have one sports guy, one news guy, and the economies of having now up to 8 stations per market that any company can have up to 8 stations. Clear Channel here owns 5 FMs and 3 AMs. And other than the great Thanksgiving episode where the turkeys were plummeting to the ground like wet bags of cement, the other one I remember was, I think they were doing a Ghost of Christmas Future, and it was Herb Tarlick coming in, and all that was there was a computer, and he said, "Merry Christmas, computer." It's not that far off in that a lot of this stuff is now, when you hear a disc jockey, he's not necessarily on, that the building is dark, but the signal keeps coming out.
Well, you talk about the 8 stations that someone can own locally. For those that don't know, Clear Channel, or at least the news at Clear Channel Colorado, they also do news sometimes for Wyoming, sometimes for Nebraska, so they even outsource even more sometimes than just what they do for news here in Colorado. So absolutely, they try to take that economies of scale to every nth degree that they possibly can.
But keep in mind, you can automate your on-air to some extent.
Sure.
And you can have somebody in a different city who might be more talented than anybody you can find in your city doing your afternoon show through the use of today's internet, computers, MP3 files, and so on. You can't automate that salesman. Herb coming in and saying, hello, computer. That's the one thing, as a business owner, as a radio station owner myself, we always try to figure out. But you can't automate that process. That relationship process with the client will never be, I say never, probably shouldn't, but at this point, I don't see how you could automate that relationship process.
But I'm seeing the same thing in broadcast that I'm seeing in newspapers, which is the local voice is going away. And I'm not saying from a business standpoint it shouldn't. I'm just lamenting that fact. The Denver Post is largely a wire service, and they have local guys. But I'm talking about all the columnists we lost. This from Susan Green to Bill Johnson to whoever it is. Those voices represent different parts of our community, and they would talk through the newspaper. When it comes to radio and television, the same sort of thing happens. And there's only so much national talk you can do. There's only so much talk you can do about, hey, what about those presidential candidates? There's a city here, a city that has a lot of important stuff going on, and where do we hear it?
Well, I still think we've had this conversation a couple of times, you know, the doom and gloom of the consolidation and the loss of the local voice. I think there are some signs and there are some opportunities out there. One great example would be the Carrie and Rob show. They are actually syndicated, so you're still getting the economy of scale, but they're syndicated mainly through southern Utah and Colorado. So they're very Colorado focused, and if not Colorado, they're very Rocky Mountain focused.
Carrie and Rob, give us a...
It's just it's like your Caplis and Silverman. It's I mean, not that they're on opposite sides of the political aisle, but it's two people talking politics of the day.
And local politics, but they're located where?
Out of Steamboat, out of Steamboat.
Steamboat Springs, but they syndicate around in Colorado.
Yeah, they're heard on...
It's basically a syndication network if you just took Rush and made him only Florida, you know, where he lives, talking Florida issues. And that's not necessarily the case. Carrie and Rob will address national issues, but always from a Colorado perspective. And actually, I would label them probably more independent than leaning too far left or too far right.
Right.
They've gone after Representative Tipton, absolutely, because he was on their program. He said things that he later went and did not do in Washington, and they've taken him to task on that, which, you know, a local program like that talking about Scott Tipton, that's very effective.
Or let me give you one other idea. Jim Armstrong has recently been let go of the post. Dave Krieger is now no longer, I mean, he's on KOA, but he's not doing columns anymore. I mean, how about those two guys find two other guys and they put together their own little sports blog? Hey, I tell you, I'm such a Krieger fan and an Armstrong fan, I'd be going there. I'm not saying I'd be going there every day, but I'd be going there 2 or 3 times a week, absolutely.
But of course, they would make no money off of that.
I don't know that.
Compared to what they were making, I mean, they made at least 25 grand a year at the Denver Post.
Whatever they made at the Post, one thing that they didn't make was endorsement dollars. And so now, if they have their own website, they can go do endorsement deals, which might be very lucrative.
Even looking at cartoonists, we're talking about Kenny B, and I'm just a Kenny B fan. I mean, every city needs to have a wildly liberal homosexual cartoonist in an alternative paper. That's what you need. And Kenny B was the best, and it was all local.
But can you get Kenny B online now? Does Kenny B have his own website?
I don't know if he does now, but he's not in the Post or in
that's
the
transition. I mean, that's the future.
Yeah, we don't have a single cartoonist in Colorado. I mean, not a single paper has an on-staff cartoonist. We miss that, and so I'm worried. You bring up the internet. Yeah, is that where we're going to get our local voices? The difference was, and again, I'm not saying this is a bad change, but I'm saying the difference is in the internet, there's lots of little voices.
It's like CB radio.
Right. Yeah, it's like CB radio. Whereas the old model had several kind of large voices, and they all had different styles.
You know, the internet, I think, for broadcasters, for radio and television, is a great, you know, I always compare it to the steak dinner. You know, great steak dinner, you've got the meat, the potatoes, and some parsley you'll do something with later, but the internet plays that secondary, tertiary role to the steak. If you order a steak dinner, you're not going to be happy if it just comes out slab on a plate. You're going to be looking for those side elements, and I think that's effectively what internet plays a role in, because honestly, if we took away all the radio stations tomorrow and all radio's online, that would be such a, and they talk about this, we're going to have internet in your dashboard soon. Where do you start? I haven't found the last page of the internet. You know, you go scanning for a dial, you'll have your favorites, but now it'll just be on a national or international scale. And, you know.
Let's pick that up, because that affects your world so much, which is broadcasting, that kids, damn kids, hate kids. All their energy and hair and crap like that. Get off my lawn, kid. Yeah. They have no patience for commercials. Matter of fact, they don't even have patience for programming. When we were kids, you listened to KIMN or some other station, and some guys deciding what we're going to listen to, and then we wade through the commercials. The new generation has no patience for that. Not only will not listen to commercials, they'll program themselves. They'll listen to Pandora or Spotify.
Pandora is sticking commercials back into their stream now, you know, or you can pay this small fee. Yeah, I would actually, just a side note to that, I think Pandora, as much as they're trying to be a threat to radio broadcasting, is more of a threat to satellite radio than it is to terrestrial broadcasting, because the one thing that terrestrial broadcasting has, even if they are piping and programming, is when that Amber Alert came down looking for the white Mercedes-Benz today, that went out over local broadcast stations. That went out over terrestrial radio. It was not on Pandora. It was not on satellite radio. And as I made my commute in this morning, I was hearing it all over the radio. It was being discussed. That is that local level in an emergency situation. But just don't get on the internet.
I'd even bet that those stations, well, of course, they all broadcast the Amber Alert, but I'd bet you if let's say you're a fan of KHOW Radio and you weren't listening at that moment, I still bet you they tweeted it out and you got it on your phone. So they were engaged social media with the Amber Alert.
It was on the emergency alert system. So
but I can imagine
over the air, no matter what the time.
You know, we no longer have cell phones. We have computers,
right.
And why won't Pandora, Spotify, whatever, become the radio of the future? iHeartRadio, of course, which is Clear Channels. Why won't it? Because you'll be listening to it in your car. You'll be streaming it. Won't you know, I understand you make a living because of airwaves. But dude, why would I invest in your business? I will admit
this on television. I have a Pandora account. But when I want to know what's going on in the world that surrounds the outside of the glass in my car, I have to listen to a local radio station. And for Pandora to do, in every city, from Greeley, Colorado, to Denver, to Colorado Springs, to Walsenburg, something for that local community, they can't afford to. You talk about consolidation in broadcast.
But you just told me that the stations can't afford it either, which is why we're getting downsized.
But when you are talking about programming your own entertainment, you take the surprise factor goes away. I mean, do you remember being, listening to FM radio in the 80s, and then that song that you hadn't heard in 4 years comes on, and you're like, wow. Last song I thought I would hear today, right? Yeah. There's that surprise factor.
King Creole and the Coconuts?
Right.
Oh my God, I haven't heard this since college.
When you get up in the morning and you turn on Peter Boyle's, there's going to be a surprise there, 9 times out of 10. And so, programming your own entertainment's fine to a degree, but the creativity and the other content that you get, that's what keeps people coming back.
Particularly with talk, is that it's improv. That's the beautiful thing I love about talk. It's improvisational. You go, and Pete is one of the kings of it. You don't know what's going to happen. Talk radio is almost like watching a sporting event. Yeah, not too sure which way it's going to go. So it's not there. Will there always be a market for local voices? And when I say local voices, not just broadcast, but I'm also talking in print or Kindles or whatever.
I think you absolutely have to have that local voice. If all you're talking about, and I can go back to an example of when we first were programming our station, we were mainly syndicated. It was all piped in programming from New York, LA, and I'll never forget the day it clicked for me. I turned it on in the morning, whatever the syndicated show was discussing some issue. It was a slow news day, basically. Midday show talked about the same issue, syndicated programming. Afternoon show talked about the same issue. About 7 o'clock at night, I realized as the owner of this property, we've talked about the same thing for almost 12 hours today. How much of the audience went click, I'll go listen to music, let me go find anything other than this topic. A great example, we used to be a Sporting News radio affiliate, and it was summertime, it was a national network, and some player, I think, had passed away suddenly. I don't remember his name, but early 2000s. And that was all they could talk about all day long. How much can you rehash the death of a player all day long? There's only so many ways to say he died. And then you're out of topics. So when it's national, there's never that break for the local audience, and they will seek out local information. You've got to provide it in some form, or you're just rehashing old topics all day long. Right now, it's all about the Republican race.
And when you talk the Republican race,
right?
When you talk about the small voices, if I can go ahead and get the shameless plug out of the way, CompleteColorado.com is what we do as a news aggregator when we're not pulling in stories from the mainstream media. I have a relationship with many of these small voices. So when my colleague at the Independence Institute, Ben DeGrow, breaks something on teachers' unions, we break it on Complete Colorado.
And it's local.
And it's local. So by aggregating and supplying people with that steady diet of news, whenever the smaller voices do occasionally make their own unique content, we're happy to insert that to make sure that it gets amplified and that it gets out there in the right way. And I even think the Denver Post has been good about that to a degree. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, and I'll agree with you. Put your caps on for a second. It's a year or two ahead, 20 years ahead, I don't know, but Pete Boyles decides to mount his Harley and ride off into the sunset. Mike Rosen has some limo pick him up, and he rides out into the sunset. And those two big voices in Colorado radio that are opinion voices. Dave Logan's terrific, and the morning show is great, but those are news and sports and different things. do they get replaced by strong local voices that will have that history? I look at what's going on with newspapers. When you can hire people for $7 an hour from journalism school, why would you pay Lynn Bartles or John Sanko way back when, or the columnists that have the history of, hey, here's what happened 20 years ago. I've been through this scam before. What fills those spots? I'm just curious.
I think you do look into the smaller markets. When we operated out of Greeley, Colorado, you're talking about kind of I always used to describe it as it's a garden. You stick a seed in the ground, sometimes it dies. And sometimes you stick a seed in the ground and you grow up this beautiful flower, and it went to Denver. So, there will always be that side talent pool of people who are getting better and better at what they do. And let me bring it back to your question, though. If a Mike Rosen ups and leaves, what do you put into that time slot? The question becomes at that point, your audience. You've got to maintain that audience. That audience is your key to your station's billing, to the happiness of your clients. If you just pipe in some satellite programming that can't deliver the numbers and can't deliver to the audience, you ultimately will tank that station. So you're going to look for somebody, and think about it. When a player first enters a team, he's not necessarily paid the highest amount of money. He's not the $1 million maker from day one. As he gets better, he makes a lot more money. So to a certain extent, the day Mike Rosen hangs his hat gives them a chance to find that local talent at a little bit lesser fee.
Oh, think about it. Think about around the noon to 3 o'clock, if you're floating around, where do you find on the dial a local voice? K-House got syndicated back, and you've got Rush, then you go over to KNUS and it's syndicated, you go to KLZ and it's syndicated, you go all over the dial and it's syndicated. And where?
Well,
let me ask you, will podcasts, will people in their basement ever catch on to something that becomes a voice, or will it always just be people of interest together?
I've always been negative towards the future of just strictly internet radio and podcasting. Let me just go back to the example I brought up earlier, the Carrie and Rob show. I still think there are opportunities to sort of grow these syndicated networks. The problem is you still have these proprietary boundaries. Let me give you an example as quick as I can. When I started in radio in Oklahoma City, I worked for
You're from Oklahoma?
I started with a non-clear channel station, and it flipped to News Talk. Now, at the time, Sean Hannity was not being aired anywhere in the market, but the clear channel affiliate bought the rights to Sean Hannity, and they still didn't air him. Why? They just didn't want us to be able and go buy him. So they literally paid the rights to a show and stuck it up on the shelf just so their new competitor wouldn't be able to get it. So when you have those kinds of, I don't know what you call it, but when you start getting that protectionist about and proprietary about your content, I think the industry as a whole starts to lose. I saw 60 Minutes the other day on MSNBC. That's the future. I mean, that's something that could help radio right there.
What do you mean? Explain that. Because it's supposed to be on CBS.
It's supposed to be on CBS, and I'm flipping through, and it's 60 Minutes on MSNBC. And the only thing they've done is they've recut the one thing where they stand in front of the big postcard. They recut that, and then they say, "I'm Ed so and so for CBS or for 60 Minutes on MSNBC," and that's an idea that radio could really benefit from.
Selling the same product over and over,
so that the person who replaces Peter Boyles at 630 KHOW is also heard on KVOR down in the Springs or.
And I was going to point
Grand
to that.
Junction.
You talk about Afternoon Drive. KRDO has a live news team in the afternoons, and they're actually one of the first stations in Colorado Springs to do an FM news talk, simulcasted with, I believe, their AM as well. Northern Colorado has KFKA. They do a live afternoon talk show as well. So you can go up and down the Front Range and maintain live and local presence with local shows.
We've only got a few minutes left. Talk to me about FM talk, because I believe there's a real future in FM talk, and I'm trying to understand the cultural difference. When a station can simulcast their talk station on FM, all of a sudden they get a real solid hold. We've seen it in a lot of different cities. Haven't seen it in Denver.
Well, you did have a talk. You had The Truth. Was on, I think that was Max Media for a while, and
why is it different on FM?
This is just purely my opinion, but I think the problem that Max had with the Truth format was, was an FM talker. But there is a point where they didn't have a lot of live and local on that station. They were simulcasting, and what do you have left?
Yeah.
KOA, KHOW, KNUS, forgive me for not naming all of them. KLZ, yeah, they are all doing talk programming, and they've all picked, you know, the cherries out of the bin. So you're left with, you know, what's left to syndicate.
And they won't, and they can't afford to go local.
And the problem is launching a local format. Well, we remember a local format. Remember KNRC, I think it was?
Yes.
Yeah, launched right out of the gate with nothing but live and local. And that was unfortunately a very short-lived experience for them because they couldn't take down the powerhouses like KOA.
Well, they also had a signal of a baby monitor, so that hurt as well.
Signal is important.
What I think about radio, whether it's AM or FM, is I think it is still losing out as long as there is not a really high-grade transcription software where if Mike Rosen has a fantastic 10 o'clock hour, this transcription software puts it out on a single web page, and so rather than me having to listen to the whole hour on a podcast, I can scroll through the words very quickly. And not only is this just helpful for me, the person that might rather read, it's also helpful in terms of Google's searches. I mean, I can't Google what Mike Rosen said and get it because it's still in audio format. I need a transcript. When radio gets to that point, that's going to be a big breakthrough, whether it's AM or FM talk.
I think there's one element, though, that's missing, and I understand the desire to read, and you're talking about the convenience of it, but you lose the emotion in a podcast. The emotion of live callers, anything could happen. The host could lose his marbles on the air or might make a statement.
Happened.
Never happened.
Never.
But if you read that, you sense it, and then you're going to listen to the podcast.
And then you're going to listen to it. But you know, how much fun is it to watch a live broadcast versus something you know is tape delayed?
All right, just a few seconds left. Have we bottomed out? Or can we say the local voices? There's no more to cut? Real fast. Denver Post cut 8% of their news staff.
There's not much left to cut there, but the people that have been cut, I still can see them doing an online venture that could work.
Broadcasters will continue to have challenges. There'll be upswings and downswings, and ultimately we'll see some people go and some great people come.
It's the great people going I worry about. Listen for me. That's right, 5 o'clock to 8 o'clock on 630 KHOW, Denver's talk station, this Sunday and every Sunday, and you'll hear me filling in for Mike and Pete and all the rest. Please listen. I'm a very lonely man. And check out independenceinstitute.org. Gentlemen, thank you, and we'll see you next week.